Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video. And today I'm going to be doing my January wrap up and telling you about all the books that I read in the month of January. So January was a very productive reading month for me. I read 15 things in total, which I'm going to tell you about today. Quite a lot of them were read on one day. I had a day of reading in the month. I'll link the vlog that I made of that day down below. And I read quite a lot of short classics on that one day, but I did read lots of other good stuff in the rest of the month as well. So let me get into the books I read, and I'll start off with the classics because I read quite a lot of classics this month. Starting off with some Victorian literature, one thing I read in January was Wilder's Hand by Jo Sheridan Le. This is a fairly long book, and it took me quite a lot of January to get through this, but I really enjoyed it. Jo Sheridan Le is a fantastic writer. This is the fourth thing I've read by him. I love his writing style. I love the spooky, sinister atmosphere of his books. And Wilder's Hand is a kind of like sensation mystery novel, I guess, and it follows a few different families who have kind of been connected with each other for a very long time, but they sort of have like complicated family feuds and mysterious histories between them. So there is the Brandon family, the Lake family, and the Wilder family. And at the beginning of this book, Mark Wilder and Dorcas Brandon have agreed to be married. This marriage is going to make them both pretty rich, but it is a bit of a marriage of convenience. And our narrator of this book is a childhood friend of Mark Wilder's who is invited to kind of come and visit them all before the marriage. But there is a kind of tense atmosphere at Brandon Hall, and one day Mark Wilder goes to London with not a very good explanation in the letter he leaves behind. But although he continues to write letters to the people he has left behind, he never comes back. And we kind of know from the beginning that there is some secret we're not privy to, and everything kind of goes on from there. This book is really interesting and really great. I found it very gripping and really fun, and it has a lot of fantastic characters in. I think the central mystery is done well, but I think my favourite thing in this book was the characterisation. Rachel Lake especially, I just thought was fantastic. I loved her as a character. She was so interesting, and her friendship with Dorcas Brandon was really well done as well. And then Rachel's brother, Captain Lake, was so fantastically drawn and so kind of sinister. There's also this lawyer who kind of like pretends that he's really good, but he really very much isn't, and he was a really interesting character. And then Mark Wilder's brother, the Reverend, was a really interesting character. Like, I just really enjoyed all of the characters in here. This book has a slightly odd narrative style because it's narrated from the perspective of this childhood friend of Mark Wilder's, and this narrator features in quite a lot of the chapters as a character, but for quite a lot of them he isn't present. He just tells you what happened, but it doesn't like move into a different perspective. He just says, oh, I know what happened because I was told about it later. I'm very familiar with all these events, so I can just tell you about them, which I thought was quite odd, but I kind of liked and I kind of went with. Another thing I really enjoyed about this book was the title. Wilder's Hand is such a great title, and it has like so many different kinds of significance, I suppose, because Wilder's hand could refer to Mark Wilder giving his hand in marriage to Dorcas Brandon, but it could also refer to his handwriting, because there's a lot about him sending letters and writing letters throughout the book. We also know that Mark Wilder really likes to play cards, so there's kind of like the card playing reference in there, like has he overplayed his hand? And I just really enjoy how the title has like so many dual meanings. I think it's really fun. Anyway, I thought this was great, very good Victorian sensation fiction, definitely a book I'd recommend. The next book I want to talk about is Elizabeth and Her German Garden by Elizabeth von Arnim from 1898. This is a semi-autobiographical novel which is presented as the diary of a woman called Elizabeth who's living in Germany with her husband, and talking about how she finds kind of relief from her husband, her children, her life in her garden. And we kind of know her marriage is a bit unhappy. She refers to her husband as the man of wrath, and there's a lot of like subtly subversive sort of proto-feminist elements in this book, which I found quite interesting. I don't think I loved it quite as much as the other book I've read by Elizabeth von Arnim, which is The Enchanted April, but I did still think it was a very good read. Then I also read The Cop and the Anthem and Other Stories by O. Henry, Henry, which I really enjoyed. So O. Henry was a kind of late 19th century, early 20th century American short story writer, and I really enjoyed all the stories in this collection. I think O. Henry is one of those really fantastic short story writers who has a great way of really like telling a story in just a few pages, and he's very good at like a sense of dramatic irony or like a really good turn or twist in the story. There were so many stories I loved in here. I think I especially loved The Gift of the Magi and Transients at Arcadia, but to be honest I thought all of these stories were pretty good, and it's definitely a collection I'd recommend. Moving on to 1912, I also read a poetry collection this month called The Listeners and Other Poems by Walter Delamere. I'm in a book club where every month we read a short story, a poetry collection and a play, and this was the poetry pick for January. To be honest, I didn't really love The Listeners and Other Poems by Walter Delamere. I feel like there were 2 poems that I liked, and all the rest I found a little bit samey. They kind of ran together for me. I didn't get too much out of them, and they were a little bit too kind of like sing-songy for my taste, I guess. So I didn't have a massively good time with The Listeners and Other Poems by Walter Delamere, but you know, that's fine. There are plenty of other poets out there who I love. Then I also read 2 Agatha Christie's in January, both of which I listened to on audiobook. The first one was a reread for me, and that was 1-2 Buckle My Shoe. My husband Nick and I are working our way through Poirot in publication order, but we skipped ahead a few books for 1-2 Buckle My Shoe because I've read this one before, and when we were doing some kind of long drives over the Christmas New Year period, I wanted an audiobook that I'd listened to before because I'm very happy listening to rereads when I'm driving, but I'm not super happy listening to new books while I'm driving. I feel like I don't end up taking the book in. But anyway, I really enjoyed my reread, my re-listen of 1-2 Buckle My Shoe. It had been quite a few years since I read it, and it is a good, solid Agatha Christie Poirot novel. I always just really enjoy Poirot. So at the beginning of the book, Poirot goes to the dentist and sees all the other people who are at the dentist's surgery, and then later that day the dentist is found dead. It is ruled a suicide, but Poirot isn't so sure, and we follow Poirot looking into the events that follow. I really enjoyed this. I feel like it's not one of my absolute favourite Poirots, but it has some really good characters, some really interesting like motivations and circumstances, and in general it's just a great read. I really enjoy Hercule Poirot, and Agatha Christie is a wonderful writer. And then after Nick and I had jumped ahead in the Poirot publication order to listen to 1-2 Buckle My Shoe, we went back to the place we were at and listened to the next Poirot, which was Murder in the Muse, which is a short story collection. So I think there's 4 or 5 short stories in here following Poirot solving some crimes, as he does. My favourite short story was probably the title one, Murder in the Muse, which I thought was done well, but all of the stories were great. Agatha Christie just has like a really fantastic eye for character, where even in a really short story she can just create characters so well. So I really enjoyed this too. Agatha Christie is great. Sticking with some short stories, I also read The Closed Door and Other Stories by Dorothy Whipple in January. This is a short story collection from the 1930s, early 1940s, very similar time to the 2 Agatha Christie books I've just spoken about, and this was a fantastic short story collection. I love Dorothy Whipple. I really enjoy the way she writes, and I feel like she's really great at capturing like moments and characters and kind of like complex family situations. There were a lot of themes of like generational divides in this short story collection, which I really enjoyed. I think my favourite story was probably the title story, The Closed Door, which was really great, and about a young woman whose parents never really wanted a child, and she ends up feeling so stifled by their opinions about how she ought to live. And then the other story I really enjoyed was Family Crisis, and it's about what happens to a respectable chemist and his wife after their daughter runs off. Again, you can see the kind of like generational strife themes going in there, but in general I really enjoyed all the short stories in here. I just think Dorothy Whipple is great. Then moving on to 1950, I read this. This is Across the River and Into the Trees by Ernest Hemingway, and I didn't really like this very much. I'm not going to go on about this too much here because this was one of the books I read in the day of reading classics. I'll link the vlog down below if you want to hear me talk more about why I didn't like this book. I don't really get on with Ernest Hemingway's writing very much. In general, I find his writing style kind of a bit muddled and difficult to follow, and then I also really struggled with the central relationship in this book. It is set in Venice just after the Second World War, and we're following a soldier who's in his 50s and his romantic relationship with a young woman who is about 18 or 19 years old, and they are in a relationship, but his pet name for her is Daughter. And I just found their relationship like both uncomfortable and not very believable, and I just, yeah, didn't really get on with this book very much, and you know, that's fine. Then I read one individual short story from 1959, which was the short story pick for my book club in January, and that was William and Mary by Roald Dahl. This was really interesting to read because this is a short story by Roald Dahl for adults, and I have read lots of Roald Dahl's children's books. Well, I read them as a child, I don't remember them very well, and it was really interesting because in some ways it was very similar in tone to his fiction for children, but it was also more adult and grown up, and it's basically about this husband and wife, and when the husband dies, she gets a letter from him where he explains that he has agreed to a strange scientific experiment. And I won't tell you anything more than that because it would spoil the story, but I did really enjoy the short story. I thought it was very well done. And then the drama pick for the book club was this. This is Lael Sur by Michel Tremblay. This is a French-Canadian play from 1965, and it was translated into English by John Van Burek and Bill Glasgow, and I just thought this was fantastic. This was one of my favourite reads of the month. This was just a wonderful, wonderful play. Absolutely everything that I really love in a play. I spoke about this a bit more in the Reading Classics All Day vlog. I'll leave that link down below somewhere, but basically this is a book about various women who all come together for a stamp pasting party because one of the women has won 1 million stamps of the kind of voucher coupon variety, and so she invites her neighbours, her sisters, her family, her friends round to her kitchen to help her paste stamps. And so we get all these women together and they're mostly just like pasting stamps and chatting, but then the way the play works is that the spotlight will fall on like one of them or two of them, and suddenly we'll get this monologue about their lives, and so we get to see the kind of gap between the self they're putting out to the world and the self that they are on the inside, and we get to see all of their different kind of problems and frustrations and how so many of these women are really kind of restricted by the society that they're living in. There's also a lot of generational conflict because we have the sort of middle-aged women who disapprove of the greater freedom for women that the 1960s is bringing, but we also have the younger generation who are struggling with their own issues, and it's just fantastic, both exceptionally funny and exceptionally tragic, and I just thought it was wonderful, so I highly recommend this, and yeah, definitely need to read more by Michel Tremblay in the future. Right, we're finally into 21st century literature, and the first thing I actually read in January 2024 was this. This is What You Are Looking For Is in the Library by Michiko Aoyama, and this is translated from the Japanese by Alison Watts, and this was a wonderful, wonderful read. And this book is kind of somewhere between a novel and a short story collection, and it centres on a local library. And we have basically 5 chapters or short stories from the perspective of 5 different people who come from different backgrounds, you know, people of different ages with different jobs, different life circumstances, and they all feel that there is a lack of something in their life. They're all lonely or frustrated or kind of unhappy in some way, and all of them end up going to this local library, and when they go to this local library they meet the librarian, and the librarian gives them a list of books, the majority of which are the books that they said they were looking for when they came in, and one of which is a random book that she's just decided might suit them, which somehow ends up sparking something important in their life. And it's about how all of these people go to the library and end up kind of finding what they need there, but also it is about the librarian herself. We never see anything from her perspective, but we get to know her throughout the book through the people that she meets, and I just loved this so much. It was so delightful and so uplifting. It's just a wholesome, lovely book, and I love the way the different stories kind of link together and how there are little references to some of the earlier stories in the later ones. I just thought it was so well done, so I highly, highly recommend this. Really, really great read. Just, yeah, really, really fantastic. Moving on to some historical fiction. This month I read Wewood by Amelia Hart. This is a proof copy. I'll put the finished cover up on the screen here. It came out in February 2023, so I'm a bit late to the party, but I'm glad that I finally got to this. I didn't actually read this physical copy. I actually listened to the audiobook, which I got through my library, and I really enjoyed the audiobook. It had multiple narrators, which worked very well for this book because this is a kind of triple narrative. So we're following 3 characters characters, one in the present day, one in the 1940s, and one in the 17th century. And these women are kind of related to each other through family, but also through a place called Wewood Cottage that they all interact with in some way or another. In the 17th century, we're following a woman called Altha, who has been accused of witchcraft. In 1942, we're following a teenage girl called Violet, who is unhappy in her life and has a very difficult relationship with her father. And in 2019, we're following a woman called Kate, who is fleeing an abusive relationship. And throughout the book, we find out kind of how these women connect. I really enjoyed Wewood, especially Altha's narrative, which was definitely my favourite. I thought this was a really interesting read, and like I said, I would definitely recommend the audiobook because having the multiple narrators was a really nice kind of added element to this. And then another work of historical fiction I read in January was this. This is The Great Divide by Cristina Henriquez, and this was fantastic. This is a new novel that is coming out in March, and so I've got a proof copy here, which the publisher very kindly sent me, and I just thought this was wonderful. This book is set in 1907 in Panama, and it follows a wide range of characters who are all affected in some way by the building of the Panama Canal. We're following Ada Bunting, a 16-year-old girl who has come from Barbados to get work in Panama in order to send money home for her unwell sister. We're following Omar, a 17-year-old boy from Panama who is part of the labour force working to build the canal, and also his strained relationship with his father, a fisherman who he hasn't spoken to for 6 months, even though they continue to live in the same house. We're following John and Marion Oswald, a married couple who have come from the US to Panama because John is a scientist and he's hoping to find a cure for malaria. And we're also following a lot of other people in the surrounding area, some of whom are kind of in favour of the building of the Panama Canal, and some are very much against it and are trying to protect lands and communities and towns that are going to be destroyed or moved for the building of the Panama Canal. And I just thought this book was so fantastic. It is so rich and so exquisitely written. And I think the thing I loved about it most was just how seamlessly Cristina Henriquez weaves together all of these different narratives and all of these different stories in this really beautiful way. And also, this is going to sound very nerdy, but this is one of the best examples I've read for ages of third-person omniscient narration done really well. Because in general, when writers write in third person nowadays, it's much more common for people to write in limited or close third person, where it's third person, but you're following just one character. That is kind of the more conventional thing to do nowadays. But in the past, in the 19th century, it was very common to write third-person omniscient narrator, where the narrative perspective could kind of move between different characters in third person. That's what Austen and Dickens and Trollope and a lot of other 19th century writers do. And I really enjoy third person omniscient narration, but it's not done very often in 21st century literature. A lot of people kind of shy away from it, which I kind of understand why, because it is quite difficult to do well. But Cristina Henriquez does it so well in The Great Divide. I feel like it was just fantastically written, and the narrative perspective and the way we move between all of these different characters and the way we were kind of following one character, and then they'll almost brush past someone else in the street, and then we'll hear about that person's story for a paragraph and then go back to the other character. It just worked so well, and it was just brilliant. It was really moving and really powerful as well. There are so many interesting themes in this book. I love the title, The Great Divide, because obviously it's talking about the Panama Canal, which was a literal kind of building a divide in the land. But also there are so many other kinds of divisions that are explored in this book. Divisions based on gender, on race, on class, on generational differences, and, the division between different people who are struggling to understand each other. I just thought this book was so good, and I highly, highly recommend it. A really, really fantastic novel. Just, yeah. What a brilliant book. Okay, next I want to talk about Gwen and Art Are Not in Love by Lex Croucher. Again, I didn't actually read this physical copy. I listened to the audiobook, and I'm really glad I did. I thought it was a fantastic audiobook, and it had two narrators, which I really enjoyed, one for Gwen and one for Art. So this is a YA historical novel by a real favourite author of mine. Lex Croucher also writes books for adults set in the Regency period, and they've had 3 books out before: Reputation, Infamous, and Trouble, all of which are wonderful. I've had the pleasure of working on some of Lex's adult fiction before in an editorial capacity, and I just love their books very much. I just think they are one of the funniest writers working today. And so I was really excited to pick up Gwen and Art, which is their first YA novel, and I just thought it was amazing. Like, I just loved everything about this. This is like pure joy in a book. So Gwen and Art Are Not in Love is set in the medieval period in Camelot, and it follows Gwendolen and Arthur. Gwendolen is the princess, Arthur is the son of a lord. They are sort of 17, 18 years old, but they've been betrothed for a very, very long time, since they were infants. But the problem is that Gwen and Art are not in love. They in fact hate each other. So when Arthur is summoned to Camelot for the summer tournament season, he's not very happy, and nor is Gwen. However, one night soon after Arthur's arrival, Gwen catches Arthur kissing a boy, and after it becomes clear that Arthur knows all about Gwen's crush on the only female knight in the tournament, Lady Bridget Leclerc, Arthur and Gwen decide to sort of team up and pretend that they're getting on really, really well and that they're excited about their engagements in order to kind of throw other people off the scent. And so what Lex really cleverly does in Gwen and Art Are Not in Love is kind of combine a lot of rom-com tropes, kind of enemies to lovers, or in this case enemies to friends, and kind of fake dating, but bringing those tropes into service for what is a friendship story. And there are love stories going on in this book. Gwen, as I said, is falling in love with a female knight called Bridget Leclerc, and Arthur finds himself increasingly intrigued by Gwen's brother Gabriel, who is heir to the throne. But although there are those kind of love story elements going on in this book, really at the heart of this book, it's about two queer teenagers helping each other discover who they are in a really like lovely, heartwarming, wonderful way. I loved the friendship between Gwen and Arthur. I also loved so many of the characters in this book. Gabriel, I just thought was fantastic. And this book was like truly wonderful all the way through. I was just having a whale of a time the whole way through, thinking what an amazing book this is. And then the dramatic climax happened, and the dramatic climax was incredible. Like, not really what I was expecting, and all kinds of amazing levels of fantastic, and I just thought this was so good. I feel like I've said that lots of times now. The ending of this book was just amazing. Like, I knew I was gonna love this, but it really like blew me away. I thought it was so fantastic, and it just, yeah, cemented my opinion that Lex Croucher is just exceptionally talented, and yes, I highly recommend this. It also did make me think that I should pick up more YA, so if anyone has read Gwen and Art and has read other YA books that you think are similar, I would really love to know. I feel like maybe I should try some more YA historical fiction, and if anyone has any recommendations for other YA historical fiction, I'd be really interested to know, because I think that's something I'd really enjoy. And yeah, this was just fantastic. I highly, highly recommend it. And then the final book that I read in January was a graphic novel, which is very unusual for me. I haven't read a graphic novel for probably years, but this is Neona by N.D. Stevenson. And I read this because me and my husband Nick watched the new Netflix film, which is an adaptation of Neona. And we both thought it was absolutely wonderful, like genuinely one of the best films I've seen for a really long time. I thought it was so fantastic. And it was just such a wonderful film that it made me think I really want to read the source material. So I got myself a copy of Neona and read it through in like 2 days and just really, really enjoyed it. I think I probably didn't love the graphic novel quite as much as I love the film, but I think that's probably because I watched the film first. I feel like if I had read the graphic novel first, I might feel the other way round. I think that the film is very much inspired by the graphic novel, and you can see certain elements where it has been very heavily inspired. The character of Neona is very, very similar, but some of the things happening around her are a bit different, and the kind of context to the story is a bit different, I guess. So it was really interesting to read the graphic novel and kind of see the differences between it and the Netflix adaptation. Anyway, I should explain what it is about. Neona is set in a fantasy world which is both kind of technologically advanced, but also, you know, they like to use swords and have knights and kind of be a bit medievally in some of their aesthetics. And we're following supervillain Lord Blackheart and what happens when he gets a new sidekick, a young girl called Neona, who turns up and says that she wants to work for him, and she is a shapeshifter. Everyone in the world thinks that she is a monster, and so these two people team up to be supervillains together, but really they're not actually trying to do evil things. They're trying to expose the fact that they live in quite a tyrannical society, and it's just really, really great. Like I said, I think I loved the film even more than I loved the graphic novel, but I also really loved the graphic novel. I thought it was fantastic, absolutely beautiful. Like, I'll see if I can find you a good page, but like, I just really, really enjoyed the art style. I thought it was, yeah, just such a fun, really engaging read, and it did make me think that I should read more graphic novels because I haven't read one for probably years and I really enjoyed this. So any graphic novel recommendations you have, please do leave them down below in the comments. So those are all the things that I read in January. I really enjoyed my month of reading, and I've read a lot of great things. So let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. That's all for now. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.